This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast, where interesting people from all walks of life sit down for a drink and a conversation. Each week, Drink O'Clock features a diverse range of guests who share their stories, expertise, and insights. Hosted by Rob Max AVV Valencias. This podcast is the perfect way to unwind and hear from some amazing people over a refreshing beverage. So, sit back, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the conversation on Drink O'Clock.
Fucking bam! It is a fucking thirsty Thursday, and I had a fucking long day, and I can't wait to drink. So, welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Valencias, and I have with me the pleasure, Mike Lund. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Hey, doing all right. Glad to be here.
You out there in Cali, right?
I am. So it's been uncharacteristically rainy, which is the whole thing I have moved back here to avoid.
I was gonna ask you about that. I interviewed another dude from Cali, and he's like, or no, it was Tuesday, and it was an author, and she was telling me she's out in LA, and she's like, dude, it is just pouring rain. I'm like, dude, you're probably, I mean, at least the state's probably fucking loving it because there's never rain out there. So,
I mean, the trick is like where we're getting it so I'm in the LA area. It all just pretty much runs off to the ocean pretty quickly. So we're in the brief period of time where the LA River is actually a river and not just an empty concrete channel. But I much prefer it when the rain is up in the mountains because then it's snow and then it stays up there and we've got water for summer. But California really does live up to it never rains in California, but when it does, it pours.
Yeah, I saw some crazy videos of the LA River.
Yeah.
It was like fucking plowing through. Like it looked insane.
Yeah, I remember growing up, and it would be because for late 90s, we had a lot of rainy seasons, and it would be at some point during that, there would be and today's news story is helicopter footage as they try to fish someone out of that thing.
That bad, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, it runs. It looked like the Nile fucking river. And I was like, that's in L.A.? Like, where the fuck? Like, we were in L.A. What's the name of the place we climbed? Dun River Falls? Oh, Runyon Canyon.
Oh.
I had tore my ACL, and I don't know if I don't think I had it repaired at the time. And I actually climbed with them with a torn ACL. I had just like a sleeve on my knee, and I definitely fell like 3 times probably. But it was cool. Like once you got up to the top, it was a cool experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of is if you think of like a ton of different movies, you think something like anything from Grease to like Terminator, where it's just this big empty concrete channel. Or actually, you can go further back. LA River is in the movie Them with the giant ants. It's mostly.
I didn't realize that was the LA River in fucking Terminator.
That one may be one of the things that feeds into it up in the San Fernando Valley, but it's the same kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that part is LA River or just part of the system that flows into it, but all of those spend most of the year looking like that, and then you get this brief period of time where they flood, and it's partially why, like, we've been getting flash flood warnings for the last day or two, just because the water comes in so quickly.
That's wild, man. I think the last time we were there, it was during the drought, It was a couple. This is years ago, and they're like, don't shower for longer than 10 minutes, like that type of shit.
Yeah, we're usually in drought and
constant state of drought.
And there's also just the fact that a huge amount of California's water is going to agriculture as well. I think about 10 years ago, where it was becoming a bit of a thing of how much of the water is just going to agriculture, and some of the stuff's really water-intensive crops. And the agricultural lobby's response was, we don't use most of the water in California because most of the water goes to the environment, which was not a good defense.
You gotta love it.
Yeah, because you get into stuff like almonds, and I mean, the foundation of LA was stealing water from the Central Valley, which shows up in like Chinatown, I think, is the thing that people don't realize was a real thing. But like the Los Angeles Times building was attacked in effectively a terrorist attack. It was bombed in part because there was this thing of LA was pushing to get water, and it was taking lakes from Central California that farmers were depending on. And so, like, I think 1920s or so? 1930s? Like, the founding of LA was, or the growing of LA, a huge amount of that was you needed the water. And so there's a whole lot of areas that used to be lakes in the middle parts of California where that water was taken from.
Interesting. So the fuckers, it's like Boardwalk Empire, but instead of slinging drugs and being mobsters, they were stealing water. Well, look, let's introduce you. So you're the co-host of the Old Switcheroo podcast, which is a Nintendo Switch Online retro catalog. You guys play old games, and I wore this in honor of you, sir. I figure I do you some justice. You're a movie buff. We'll talk a little bit about movies, and you're also a NASA exoplanet scientist, right? You've helped or been credited for finding dozens of planets.
Yeah, technically I'm in a developer role now, so I do more of the management of data rather than the science side of things. So I'm basically helping the scientists get their data where they need it to be, but
it's still fucking cool, man.
Yeah, like
it's still fucking cool.
Yeah, still did all the requisite schoolwork for that. Still completed a PhD and all that. But it's more management, programming, and stuff like that.
That's cool, man. Well, let's start with the podcast, dude.
Yeah.
Retro Nintendo games. Like, what got you? Well, one, talk a little bit about what got you into the podcast scene, and talk a little bit about how you came up with the concept, because there's a lot of video game style podcasts out there. I don't know if I know of any that are just strictly like retro Nintendo games, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So I host.
Oh, cheers! By the way, I don't know if you're drinking.
Yeah.
But
I have Martinelli's, which
nice. Cheers.
Is fancy but non-alcoholic. But yeah.
Oh, good, man. Not a requirement for you. It's a requirement for me to drink. So.
But yeah. So the podcast, and so our full tagline is Gaming Retro with Mike and JMO. And so JMO is a friend of mine that we met in kindergarten, I think. Grew up around the block from him. And the podcast came out of early last year, the Nintendo Switch, through Nintendo Switch Online, which is sort of their online service. One of the things that has is a selection of games from various consoles. So it's the NES, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, the N64, the Game Boy Advanced. And they kind of release games every so often for some combination of those systems. So there's over 250 games on there now. Early last year,
that many fucking games on there.
Yeah, they've got a ton, and they keep releasing them. And so early last year, they released GoldenEye for the N64.
Oh shit!
And at that point in time, I did not own a Nintendo Switch. And JMO came to me and was like, you need to buy a Nintendo Switch because they've just added GoldenEye on there, and you can do online multiplayer.
So you can play online multiplayer with fucking GoldenEye with the Switch?
Yeah.
I did not know that. That is amazing.
Yeah, and so that was the initial bit. It was like, all right, I'm in. So I bought a Switch in pretty much entirely for that. Very quickly discovered that the N64 controller was a weird controller, and GoldenEye was very early in figuring out how you should have a first-person shooter game like that. That thing does not handle well, just in terms of using an entirely new controller for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I initially bought it for that, and then of course there's a couple other things on there, things like Mario Kart 64, which I think is the best one. Which again, I can play it online. And so it was really convenient that I can play that stuff with the people I used to play these things with, but that I don't necessarily see in person much now. And so
that's cool. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, it was this great thing. It's like, there's bits where it could technically be improved, and sort of like with both those, it's interesting because all it's really doing is just like showing you the same screen you'd see anyway. So even though you're playing with someone somewhere else playing online, it's still split screen. Because they didn't redesign.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they didn't redesign the game or anything. It's just there's the game. And so I'd gotten a Switch for that, and then a couple months later he came back to me. He's like, "So I've been thinking about it, and there's a bunch of gaming podcasts, but there's nothing that just focuses on what's available if you have the Nintendo Switch online service. That if you have that, you have a ton of games." And there's nothing out there that's just exploring that. There's other podcasts that have done other things that have focused on either, retro games in general, or, picked a particular console and focused on those. But this was just a podcast that will focus on, effectively, if you have Nintendo Switch online, and technically there's an expansion pack that gives you the Genesis and the N64 are not included in like the base package. But if you've got the full thing, every game that we cover, you can play with that service.
So you don't even need to buy them?
Nope. If you've got the service, they're all provided with it. And it's one of these things that I really don't know why they don't point out that they're doing this more often.
That's amazing. That's fucking legit, dude.
Yeah.
Like you might have talked. I haven't had Nintendo Online in forever, but it's tempting to do it just to check out like what other fucking games. Yeah,
I was staying with friends of my wife's back in November, and something had come up actually with Mario Kart 8 on the Switch. Because the other thing this also provides is it doubles the number of tracks you have available in Mario Kart 8.
Oh, shit.
And they had no knowledge, and they were really into the racing game. It was like, wait, so we can have Mario Kart 8, and if I'd known about this friend's partner had, like, injured his ankle and had been out of work for a while. And it's just like, so if I'd known about this a few months ago, I could have just played through all the Zelda games over the last few months when I didn't have anything else to do. It's like, yeah, no, it's amazing. So it has this great catalog to it.
The Switch is, we have one. I got mine. It was right before they shut down the country. It was like they had a deal. I think I got it during Christmas time. Like GameStop had a deal. It was like $300 or something, and you got a $50 gift card or whatever it was. And I was like, you know what, this might come in handy because I travel for work. So I'm like, fuck it, it'll be something I could travel with. So I got it and I set it up, and then I just didn't play it, and that's like half the shit that I fucking do. But obviously the country shut down. My fiance worked in she worked at like a waxing. She did sales and stuff, and I forget what's that category is that, babe? Beauty. Beauty. They basically shut Beauty down, right, all over the country. So, she got unemployment or whatever until they opened back up. They were allowed, and it was, I don't know, it was like 5-6 months, something like that. But I worked from home for like 3 months. So I'd clock in at 8:30, wouldn't have to drive anywhere. I'd clock out at 5 on the dot, and I'd be home already because I have an hour-long drive. And when I'd be done, we started playing with the Switch. So we started with Mario Kart 8 and, loved it. And we're drinkers, so we came up with drinking games for like all of this. I've talked about it on my podcast before. We have a whole drinking game set up for it. We haven't played Mario Kart in a while. But our favorite game is definitely Mario Party. The Switch version. We got the newer one that was like they took a lot of the GameCube and 64 and kind of upped it, but it's not like the Switch version.
Yeah, I forget which. I bought one of them, and I just know that when I told JMO which one I had, he's like, well, you bought the wrong one.
Yeah, if it's the newer one, if it's the newest one, which came out like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, they just took the old games and like, beefed them up a little bit, but they didn't really do anything. It's not as intuitive. The original one that was made for the Switch is just more fun. The games are obviously, they utilize the controllers a lot more, but we'll put it on 20 turns, and that's like an hour and a half. It's typically more than that, but they say it's like 90 minutes, but it ends up being probably an hour 45 to 2 hours spent on taking breaks and stuff, because it can get we're competitive people. But and then we played that the whole pandemic. I fucking loved it. It was, we still play it weekly, bi-weekly, but my big purchase was the Steam Deck. I don't know if you have one.
I don't, because I prefer just at that point to just go with laptop gaming. I'm much more a PC gamer than I am a console or really handheld.
I'm a PC gamer myself. I'm a big PC gamer. However, when I travel, I would bring in the Steam Deck. Like if you're someone that travels a lot, the Steam Deck is legit on the plane, dude. Like, it's because I have a gaming laptop myself. I have a gaming PC that I custom built. My degree's in IT. I don't use it, but I always custom build my PC. So this PC is a fucking monster. I probably rebuilt it a year ago. And then I just updated. I had an Alienware gaming laptop, and I upgraded about 6 months ago to an ROG gaming laptop that was a fucking monster. And that's what I bring with me, like, for the hotel room. But on the flight, it's a little hard to break out the gaming laptop. Like, it's not giant. Like, it's not, I didn't get a 17-incher. But having the Steam Deck, like, Witcher 3 looks amazing. Like, it's so wild to play Witcher 3 on a handheld and it not look like the Switch version. Because I own the Switch version, right? Yeah. It's a totally different game when you could play it on like decent graphics. But we play. I bought the hookup for the TV, so we'll play. We like playing board games, so we'll play like Battleship and Clue and like stuff like that. And it's something me and her can kind of do together. She's not a big gamer. She's she'll play Sims and stuff, but I'm more the Apex Legends, Valorant. Like I don't play Call of Duty as much, but like I'm more of the competitive style shooter and stuff on PC.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Haven't taken advantage of it. Finally got a second controller so that my wife and I can actually play some of the stuff off the Switch. Since I think she enjoys the racing games, and so actually, we have an episode that'll go live tomorrow where my wife guested on it, where we did all 3 Mario Kart games.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
And so I've got a handful of other racing games all on the Switch that we finally have a second controller so that we can play those, because I was lazy about getting around to getting a second controller, and the Joy-Cons are somewhat frustrating.
They were hard to get for a while. And they're fucking expensive.
Yeah.
They're not cheap. Well, you said you kind of just started or just finished your first season, right, of the podcast. What's your reception been? Has it been positive? Like have you kind of learned as you've gone through it? Podcasting's weird, man. You kind of
It is
learn as you go.
It's definitely it's a crowded field in general. There's a lot of gaming podcasts, so I think we're in a unique niche, but trying to sort of find footing there has been a bit tricky.
You'll get there, man. You just got to keep plugging along. People fail. I think it's within the first typically it's like the first 5 episodes.
Yeah.
If you get past that, then I'm on. This will be episode 70 for me, and I didn't think I'd make it this far. And advice to you: network and just make friends with other podcasters. And I've met some really freaking cool people, and I've joined networks, and I'm a co-host on another podcast now based on someone I interviewed, and we hit it off, and he's fucking great dude. And then because of another guy I interviewed, I got into this network, which got me into this other podcast. So networking's super important, and I don't think people do it enough. These people aren't your competitors, man. It's definitely not like that. And the more people you network with, I think the better your podcast.
Yeah, we're definitely starting to get to those connections at this point. It's definitely been a big jump in to sort of get a feel for this. And just a lot of things to get working. It certainly has the benefit that we're having fun with this in its own right. So it doesn't feel like quite as much of a task. Because if nothing else, we've been getting a chance to explore a bunch of games that I think certainly I wouldn't have had the motivation to check out otherwise. And some of them have been really interesting that I wouldn't have expected. So that's been fun.
Well, good, because you queued me up for my next question before we start to move on. But what's your top 3 retro games that you've played that you'd either recommend or that you've really enjoyed on the system?
Ooh, I think
put you on the spot, man.
Yeah, the first. What's worse is I know I've set up what the top 3 was in our season finale, and I don't remember what the third one was. I would say.
Well, I don't want you to ruin your season finale, but
we've had a lot in there. All
right.
And certainly, no surprise. I think Mario Kart 64 was one of the best. Going back to that was a great blast. In part, I think it's the best that Mario Kart has ever done battle. Because I prefer that to the races themselves, and I feel like that was the pinnacle of it. I actually think, in the same racing vein, I think Excite Bike 64 was a really solid entry, which has also been one of the ones to go back. And I think the third that I will go now, if I had more time to think, I may pick differently. But the third one I'd go is actually Joe and Mac. So we recently did 4 caveman-themed games that all came out on the SNES.
Classic.
And so Joe and Mac was the first of 3, where you had Joe and Mac, and then Congo's Caper, which I did not realize was connected until we actually recorded, and then Joe and Mac 2, Lost in the Tropics. And so the first of those, Joe and Mac, just there's something about that game. It's basically going through, picking up, various weapons, a boomerang and a wheel and fire, and killing all manner of dinosaurs. And
that's cool.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a platformer that's just I keep going back to because I can't quite beat it. And
those old school games are fucking hard, man. They are not easy.
They are, and it's one of these things where I can get to the final boss on the first continue, and then after I have ran out of lives, I don't have enough lives to pull it off again. So I am not quite good enough to beat that game, but I keep getting right to the end.
Just getting right there. What hopefully this one will be easy for you. So, other than the Switch, what is your favorite Nintendo system?
I mean, I think it's probably the N64. I actually am more attached to other consoles.
Okay.
All
All right, well, favorite console of all time?
Atari 2600, I think.
All right, you're going to really be mad at this then, because I'm going to show you. So I'm in another podcast called the Body Wrong Podcast. So it started out as a fantasy football, like, fucked up, where we just do dumb shit to each other. We'd spin a wheel of horrible fucking fates, and we just kind of ran with it. And so we changed it to an everyday podcast, but we still incorporate sports a little bit, but for the most part, it's kind of... we spin a wheel, we pick somebody that's part of it to choose the best of whatever topic they choose. So mine was video game systems. So I'll show you, let me share my screen. I'll show you what we came up with, and you let me know your thoughts on it. So you can see my screen here. It was tough. Okay, so I didn't put Atari 2600 on here, mainly because, like, I'm a gaming nerd, and I've barely played the Atari. So I'm 37, and I know a lot of the other guys are similar. We're all the similar age. We're either, like, early 40s or they're in their 30s. And I didn't put it on here because I don't think they would have played it enough to appreciate it.
Yeah, no,
I know it's an S.
Oh, I was
an
just
S-tier
like,
system.
it's partially I grew up with my mom really didn't like video games, but my dad had an Atari. And so I was way behind everybody else. So a lot of it is, the other thing is, a lot of those games through the 90s, or 90s and onward, I got the gaming experience of what do my friends have when I visit.
Hey, and that's what a lot of people had that.
Oh yeah,
a lot of people, that's what their video game experience was. But so obviously we changed it up how we do this. Now you can only have 2 of everything in the category, so this would probably be redone. But I feel like it was so hard to adjust this. Like, so for our S tier, we had the PS2, the 64, the PS1, and the NES. I don't think you can move any of those out of S tier. They were all game changers in their own right. The A tier, we had Xbox, SNES, and the Genesis. I was plighted in this because I think the Sega Dreamcast was way above its time. And for me, I think the Sega Dreamcast was more like a B or an A. I got outvoted. The Wii, everyone hates the Wii for some reason. I think the Wii is probably more A or S because it changed. It brought in, like, moms and dads and grandma. I worked at GameStop at the time, so it kind of changed the dynamic of gamers. Because before the Wii, it was just it was me, it was nerds, it was us, and then the Wii brought in a lot of the casual gamers, and that's when really I think gaming just kind of fucking took off because you brought in a lot more people. And then we rated the 360 a D mainly because of the fucking Ring of Death, but I do think the 360 in its own right changed gaming to a certain degree too. I mean, Elder Scrolls Oblivion, for just an example that pops up. But what do you think of the rating system we had here?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, JMO grew up very much with a Sega household, and he was the friend that lived closest, whose house I was at the most often because I could walk there. And so, like, I would agree. Like, I remember the Dreamcast. I think actually the Dreamcast that might have been that was the first time I bought a game for a console I did not own, because there was a game out where I was like, I want this game. If I buy it, I can play it at his place. So I remember I bought Star Wars Demolition for it.
Oh, nice.
And that game was awesome. And so it was like, it was worth the money, but it was like, I do not have this system. So, like, Nintendo 64 was the only Nintendo system I really played growing up. And that thing was solid. I'm still hoping that Nintendo Switch Online makes some of that experience easier. because one of the things I remember very fondly that you could do in that era was like for GoldenEye, you had all these things that you could sort of have as extra modes in multiplayer. Like you had this whole like cheat section of, you know, big heads and paintball mode and all this stuff. And you had to
Big Heads was crazy.
Yeah,
Big Heads was nuts.
And you had to unlock all of that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sufficiently good at that game and did not feel like playing that game. So I didn't unlock that stuff. Somebody else did on my game. So I think actually, like in that case, I think I just lent it. Like I gave it to JMO, and him and his brother unlocked stuff for me and returned it.
Have you ever watched the news and wished that you could see something more positive, or looked online and saw all the aggravation and anger and hatred out there and thought to yourself, why can't I just see more positive things in my life? Hi, I'm Mike Rathbun, and I'm the host of the Kindness Matters podcast. Every week, we promise to bring you stories that will uplift you and motivate you and inspire you to see the kindness and be the kindness that this world needs more of. Tune in, the Kindness Matters podcast with me, your host, Mike Rathbun.
And the problem with digital games is I can't do that now.
It's true.
It's like, they've done something neat for at least for the NES, and I think for the SNES, that they have what they call special mode, which, like, for like Super Mario Kart, the special mode already has gold on all the cups, so you can go straight to the last cup and get to Rainbow Road if you want. You don't have to unlock it. And they've done this for SNES,
That's cool.
And they've done it for SNES for a bunch of stuff. Or, you can start Zelda with all the highest weapons. So they've got these for a bunch of them. And then they've gotten to the N64, which has a bunch of games that have a whole lot of stuff to unlock, like GoldenEye, where so many people, it's like, I don't care about single-player GoldenEye. I would like to go do multiplayer. And have access to all the levels and to all those extra modes and stuff. And it's like, if you would please expand the special mode so I can jump straight to that, because I can't just lend my game to people and let them beat it for me, or like buy it used, where you'd get a used game that already had stuff unlocked.
Yeah.
This thing where it's like,
those were the days, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of games where it's like, the only way I saw how things were at the end was because I rented those games, and that game came partially beaten.
Good old fucking Blockbuster and Update Video, and kids will never understand that shit, man. They'll never get it. It was I'll tell you a funny story. When I was younger, there was a place, I think it was called Update Video, and every Tuesday, which was New Release Tuesday, there would be new movies and new games. And my dad would always take me with him, and we'd wait for them to open. I don't know if they opened at 9 or 10 or whatever. And I think they might have even opened earlier because it was a special day. And they would do like $1 game rentals and like $2 movie rentals or something crazy. So I'd always be able to rent like 3 games, and my dad would get, all the newest movies, and it was really fucking cool because you could play shit I'd never freaking play, But it was the PlayStation 1 era, back when you had games like
I think X Games was on that.
Yeah, X Games, Road Rash. Road Rash was the shit, dude. You're just fucking, it's one of those games where you had to constantly save and build up because you'd buy big, like, better bikes and faster bikes. And, Road Rash was crazy because you just beat the shit out of people. You're like hitting them with a chain in the face. You're like, get away from me, bitch. And then you could kick people.
I think that franchise had a Game Boy game as well.
Yeah, it was big for a while. I don't know what happened to it, to be honest with you, because it was a lot of fun.
Because I think it was one of the, like, 3 games that I had on Game Boy.
Fucking Game Boy, man. I said this on the podcast before. Some of my all-time favorite Game Boy games are probably games that no one's ever played. Like, it was, and my all-time favorite Legends of Zelda game. I'm not a big Zelda guy because, for a while, for me, I like open world shit, and it wasn't really truly open world. I mean, obviously, Zelda on the 64 is still outside of Majora's Mask. I think Majora's Mask is stupid, but Seasons and Ages were some of my all-time favorite Zelda games, which were Game Boy Advance games, and I played the shit out of those games. Fucking loved, and they were of the same thing. They came out at the same exact time, but they were two totally different games. You had different endings for each one.
Yeah, it'll be
underappreciated.
Interesting. I'm effectively going through the Zelda games in order. In that prior to this podcast, I had never played any Zelda game, and so
shit. Okay.
A few months ago, we did a episode with the first two Zelda games. Brought on a friend of mine that streams on Twitch. A lot of she does the 3D Zelda games, but brought her on for these of Zelda. I definitely don't. And plunged into those and discovered that I have. By the time we were to record, because I just kind of went and tried to play that on my own. And I'm like, I have no idea how anyone ever played this. And I found out, it's like, oh yeah, no, you basically just have to use a guide. And it's like, okay, nobody told me that. It was...
Ocarina of Time, dude, it's got to be the best Zelda game of all time on the 64, 100%. That game is just fucking way above its time. And just the shit that they did with the lack of graphics they had is, but that's what you're doing. You're trying to play all the Zeldas in order.
Or as part of this podcast, we're going through the Zelda games as well, and we're like, let's just go through them in order. And so at this point, I'm not looking ahead at all, really, because I'm like, we're gonna go through them all. I think should be setting up doing Zelda 3, Legend of Zelda 3, which is A Link to the Past. Probably,
yep.
Will probably be one of the next episodes we schedule to record. As we'll just continue to work our way through Zelda games.
They're tough. Bro.
They are, and so I am not getting.
It's
far.
not like today, man. It's not like today. I feel like, and it's, oh man, I'm gonna sound fucking old. Well, what's your age range? You don't have to say your age if you don't want to.
Oh, 38.
Okay, so we're the same age.
Yeah.
Do you remember looking in order to beat a game? I'd have to go on GameFAQs.com, FAQS.com, and you couldn't do it from your phone because phones didn't have web browsers back then. So you had to go on fucking AOL. You're like, I gotta figure out how to get through this fucking part, and you're on GameFAQs. And I'm like, okay, I'm here, and GameFAQs. People wrote their own guides to games. It was free, and people wrote their own shit. So they'd have pictures of stuff, their own, but it wasn't real pictures. It was they'd use slash, but it was just
the great.
It's a fucking. It was a fucking wild time, man.
Were great.
Yeah, and it worked to a certain degree, but I'm I just wish I had a fucking picture of what they're talking about because I don't know what this means. It's go left, go right, go up, go down. You're like. You
There's
lost
been
me
a couple
2 steps
things,
ago, man.
I think on some of these slightly more obscure games where I'll have to go looking for I don't know what the heck to do, and I'll go and I'll find there's one guide that was written 15 years ago that's incomplete, and I'm like, nobody has finished
rough,
this,
dude. And they probably never will, sadly. But that's cool, man. I appreciate that, and I think there's definitely some value to going back and kind of going through those games.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things we discussed with Zelda that we was like, oh, this is clearly I have played this wrong. Is that apparently the design was that the first Zelda was meant to be more communal, that you were talking to people, and it's you'd hear from someone else. Oh, well, they found this over here, and you kind of had this communal body of knowledge to get through things. I did not know that.
It was Easter eggs. It was, I mean, there was no online, so it was my buddy got through it. Let's figure out how he did. He's and oh, you you could steal from a fucking shop, and you have to steal this sword, and you have to do this. You're like, I had no fucking clue I could even do that.
Yeah, there was things where it's like, oh yeah, you have to find this under a tree. I'm like, I'm not gonna know that's a thing. Yeah, so I very much came out of that with like, I don't know how anyone liked this. This is very frustrating. And especially some of the original Zelda games. I mean, you're just kind of like rolling around a 2D, not even a 2D map, and it's like, if you didn't know to look at the third tree on your left, you're fucked, and yeah, and certainly one of the things that has helped as we go through these, because this started, I think, out of my own general combination of ignorance and stubbornness, and has now become a defining feature, is I pretty much just go through with the games with, the continues you have, and that's kind of it. JMO, when he plays through, is actually like using the Switch's ability to rewind and using the Switch's ability to save your progress in places that the original game didn't allow you to. So,
nah, dude, you got to do it the way you do it, man. You got to go old school.
This has been a point of contention a lot. Actually, to the point of a bit of a tease, our season 2 first episode we've already recorded, and it's Sonic 2, which was a big game for his family, and so we had both of his brothers on, and he made it a point on that one that when he beat that game, he didn't use any of that because he knew his brothers would not let up on him if he had.
Dude, Sonic was a fucking hard game, dude. Sonic, I don't think it's enough credit for how difficult that fucking game was.
Yeah, I streamed that one,
tough.
and I reached points where I'd never had before, and I'm just like, I can't get past this thing, and it's 2 hours in. So it's like, for me to do this...
It's like Mega Man, dude. It's like Mega Man, man. Some of those levels were like fucking impossible.
Yeah, and for me...
And I would just give up.
Yeah, for me it was also one of those things where it's like, for Sonic, like, the levels I knew were either the levels that were the 2-player levels that they'd have set up for you to play at, like, Burger King, when Burger King had game consoles.
Oh, shit, I remember that.
Yeah, it's like, it's either the games that were there, or, like, as many levels as I was able to play at a friend's house before it was like, you should go home now. So it's about like the first quarter of the game, and then a couple things that show up in the multiplayer. And then after that, it's like, I haven't seen any of this before.
That's cool, man. I really appreciate that you guys are kind of doing that. It's you piqued my interest, so I'll definitely you get a follower in me. Let's get to your job to a certain degree. Obviously, we're going to keep some. I can never say this word. Anonymity. I said it. Let's go. You got a PhD in physics, and you've been in the space field, working on. Obviously, you had talked about you kind of changed your role a little bit, but exoplanet discovery. How the fuck did you get into that, dude? Like, what do you have to go to school for? That is cool as shit. I'm obsessed with space stuff. So,
actually, I had lucked out to get into that field, sort of when I did. Because just sort of contextually, from up until the early 90s, the existence of any exoplanets outside the solar system had not yet been demonstrated. The early 90s, they found a few things that are roughly Earth-sized around a pulsar, which is basically a dead star. Which is one of these things where it's like, you technically found a thing that we'll probably call a planet, but that is not what anybody ever is thinking when you say the word planet.
And this is when Pluto was still a planet as well.
Yes. Yeah, and then jump a bit over a decade, and then in like... years after that, then you start to get the first actual exoplanet showing up. And it was a very slow field, because a huge amount of it is, when you look for things that are like the solar system, that is very hard. When you realize that there's things that aren't like the solar system that you don't necessarily expect. You can find things that are easier to detect. So a lot of the things are planets about the size of Jupiter that orbit their star in a handful of days. And because they're very close in, they're easy to detect. Or at least easier to detect than smaller planets or something like a Jupiter out in an orbit like Jupiter's that's taking years to go around. So I had known that I wanted to do something astronomy related when I'd gone to college. And so I'd done a bachelor's in physics because it was a little bit more general in its application. But with like, the department knew like the astronomy was the stuff I was interested in. So I was doing this at Cal State Northridge in the LA area. When I went on to do my master's, that's the point where you start actually doing a bit of actual research. It's not just classes and stuff. And they knew that I wanted to be doing astronomy stuff. It's a physics department, but there's some bit of astronomy. A lot of the astronomy there was solar physics. Which for me, a big driver of me being in astronomy is I don't like daytime. So studying the sun wasn't a great fit. Because I got into astronomy because that was going on when I was up at night as a kid.
You a night guy?
I very much am. Always have been.
I am too, dude.
My parents have roughly explained it. They took me outside when I was a kid, thinking that it'd be dark and quiet and cool, and I'd fall asleep. And apparently, instead, I just started asking questions and didn't stop. And so they eventually outsourced that to a local astronomy group that sort of quasi-raised me in that regard.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, because it was just, they had a point where like, well, we have no idea for the answers. We'll find someone around here who has the patience to explain all this stuff to them. So when I was doing my master's, they knew I wanted to do astronomy. And then one summer, I'm heading into campus or something, and I ran into the chair of the department, and she's just like, hey, we have someone coming that does exoplanets. It's a new hire. You should talk to him. And so that was the point where I needed to be finding research to do. And so I switched over to exoplanets at that point in the late 2000s. Really before there'd been much of an explosion in that as a field. And so it's been interesting. So then, from there, I did a PhD in Nashville at Vanderbilt. Basically, sort of running a lot of the software that was being used for a exoplanet search.
So, what all goes into discovering a new planet? Like, talk to me about the infancy stages. Like, obviously you're using high-powered telescopes and data.
Not at first. The telescope that we actually... So I was part of a project called KELT, which stands for the Kilodegree Extremely Little Telescope, which technically is actually... The name was meant to be a joke off of a different project that I think we surpassed.
That's actually hilarious. Whoever did that is an actual genius.
They also got one of the equations in one of the early papers to actually be KELT somehow. I forget how they pulled that one off exactly, but it was impressive. And so it is a very small telescope that's pretty much just a camera that looks at a large area of sky at once.
It's all about light too,
yeah,
right? Like that's
so
everything's light.
Yeah, so actually, technically, we have two of them. One's in Arizona, the other's in South Africa. And so what we're looking for are exoplanets that transit. And what that basically means is that these are planets that, from our perspective, at some point in their orbit, they pass in front of their star. And so when it does that, you see a little bit of a dimming. And that's a dimming of like 1% for something like a Jupiter or around something like a sun. And so for something like that, the approach basically is, or you can think of it this way, that if you picked a single star and just observed it constantly, you would, if something went in front of it, you'd notice it. But if you picked the wrong star and it doesn't have planets, or the planets don't line up right, or the planets are too far out for you to ever see, or they're too small, you would never see anything. It would be a total waste of your time. So this trade-off here is the more you can look at once, the better. And so with this small telescope, it looks at a very large area of the sky at once. The trade-off for that is that its resolution is rough. Its angular resolution, its ability to separate things out, is about equivalent to the human eye, which is not great.
Which is not good.
So over what you do is then you just watch over years and just try to find the spots that periodically dim. And so what you end up with is a whole bunch of light curves, basically these graphs of the brightness of stars over time, that then people have to go through and look at by eye and look at which ones seem promising. And then get larger telescopes. And when I say larger telescopes, we're dealing with a small telescope. So a larger telescope, some of them were, small colleges that have telescopes on campus that they're trying to figure out what to do with. Some of them are, a lot of engineers that have gotten very fancy telescope setups because they have the combination of disposable income and know-how.
Must be nice, right?
Yeah. So this wasn't like, oh, we have to go use Hubble or something giant. This is just like, we need a moderately sized telescope, to then follow that up and confirm that the thing we think we saw from our little telescope was real, and that it was where we thought it was, and that there wasn't, other stars in there confusing it. So we have this whole follow-up process, and then you can kind of go into some of the other things where you try and measure the star's wobble so you can get a mass of the planet, and you can start getting all these other constraints. But it was this real process of just
wild,
look at
dude.
a huge number of stars, sort of have an algorithm to kind of find the ones that seem best, and then have a group of people go through and look at all of these by eye, and take the best ones and hand those off to really a global network of people that we worked with to do the follow-up.
So, obviously, my follow-up question is going to be, once you find something that's an exoplanet, right? Explain to the listeners what the conventional naming pattern looks like, because it's definitely not normal. I've seen shit, it's like, this is the planet, blah, 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 number 70 or whatever. Obviously, you can't name it after yourself, Mike. So, what's that naming? Is there like something that is universal that they follow, or is it kind of by whatever organization finds
There's
it?
a fairly good system to it, in that really there's been an attempt to actually like name them with like fancier names, and I cannot stand it. No, and nobody uses them. That's the other part. So the name, generally it is the star's name followed by a letter, which refers to sort of order of discovery, and if you're doing multiple at once, then it's the position going outward. So in other words, for weird reasons, we skip A, but so it'll start at B. So the tricky bit is what that star name is. Some of them are bright enough stars, they've had names for a while. The exoplanet paper that I led was around a star that was not sufficiently bright to really have its own name that you really needed to pay attention to. And so We just refer to the star as Kelt 20 because it was the 20th host star that we had identified. And so the planet around it is just Kelt 20b.
Okay. That's fair. That's not too bad.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, and I appreciate that in that for anyone within the field, really from the planet name, usually you know a lot. So like a lot of the more recent ones are stuff like we'll say Kepler in it or Tess in it or something because they're being discovered by the Kepler telescope or by the Tess satellite, which is up now. So you can kind of tell where it came from. The ones that you usually get with slightly weirder names are because they're around brighter stars, and usually those are planets that were found using measuring the star's wobble, which you can kind of only do if the star is bright enough. So
I gotta ask this. I gotta ask this. So, have you specifically ever seen anything weird? And I ask this because I saw a story about the James Webb Telescope, where it, I guess, was looking at Proxima Centauri b, and they saw what appeared to be city lights on the planet. And who knows? We don't fucking know. I mean, how many light years is that? What? It's like 4 light years away, or because I think that's the closest star to us that could harbor life, right?
It's the closest star other than the sun, outright.
Okay. I think it was like 3.7 or 4 light years. I forget what it exactly was, but I mean that's pretty wild to think. I mean, there's got to be something out there. I mean, we know that if we're really thinking logically. Have you ever seen anything weird like that?
I mean, I'd say I've seen things that are weird that we then, or I think there's a rush often to go between this is weird and this is weird, therefore aliens. And so my favorite story for this, because it kind of encapsulated this, because I was with a bunch of amateur astronomers back, I think before I'd gone to college. And it was just an event where we had a bunch of telescopes out at a library. It was towards the end of the night. And someone spotted just sort of a dark shape moving across the sky. And it was like, that is very strange. I was like, no idea what that is. And we saw a second one about half an hour, maybe 15 minutes later, that happened to be on the right path that it went in front of the moon. And because I was there with a bunch of astronomers and people had telescopes, someone was able to check it out, and what we were seeing that looked like a dark object, like a big dark object, was in fact a whole bunch of small dark objects flying together, and it was a flock of birds.
Oh shit!
Yeah, it looked really weird, and it wasn't until it went in front of the moon. It's like, oh, that is fascinating, and not what we expected. So there's an element of, and birds are generally not that weird of a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So when you start to then get further out into things, you start getting things where it's like, this is very unusual. We're not sure what this is. And I think there's some mark of, it doesn't apply to everyone, but I feel like a lot more people in science are a lot more willing to say, I don't know what that is, and actually leave it at that and not need the second part to be, so I'm going to presume it's this.
Yeah.
Want to know what it is, but not necessarily sure. So there was a object that the Kepler Space Telescope found that has been very confusing. I haven't checked in the last couple years, but I don't think it has an answer yet. It is a star that for some reason saw its brightness drop significantly and in a way that they couldn't really explain. And so this got big in the news like something like 8 or 9 years ago, maybe slightly less than that, as, oh, this is a Dyson sphere, this is a megastructure, this is aliens. And it's much closer.
I know what you're talking about. I think I read a couple stories on that.
Yeah, and this is where you do get the name attached, because it'll show up as Tabby's star or Boyajian's star, because she was the first author on that paper that presented that, and it's basically like, we're not sure what this is. I also appreciate it because they managed to, the article title, like the article they published in an academic journal, used this part of the title was "Where's the Flux?" So they managed to get WTF into that title.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's, at least when last I checked, it's like, we're not really sure what's going on with it. And I had done a little bit of work on that and had put out some research towards trying to figure out if there's other things like that and figure out how that's been behaving on a longer time scale.
Are you a do you like audiobooks or do you read?
I go through a lot of audiobooks, more because I don't have the
drive
time
a
for
lot.
the reading.
Yeah, I drive a lot, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. If you like sci-fi, there's a book called We Are Bob. Have you ever heard of it?
I haven't. I'm very deficient on sci-fi. I've worked on improving some of it.
I think that's... Is that the first book? Let me just double check. We Are Legion, We Are Bob. So, yeah, We Are Legion. It's the first book. It's on Audible.
I have some credits
to
use up.
Yeah, I feel like it's a whole series. It's really fucking good. So, before we end, there's something else I want to ask you, and then we'll kind of end there. But it's really cool, dude. So it's about a guy. He dies, and they replicate his memory. His name's Bob, and he's kind of the first sentient, like AI, I guess, so to say. This was written. When was this? This was written in 2016, I think. He was like the first sentient AI, and it goes through the process of him realizing he's dead, that he's an AI, and his whole job is to create versions of himself and start to go out into the universe and find planets that humans can inhabit. Or if there is places that he can kind of take a look and see what that civilization is doing, maybe assist them. It's a really fucking good book, man. It gets really in depth because he names his clones, and then he's connected to all his clones, and then he creates an intranet. It's really like the author. What's the author's name? It's Dennis E. Taylor. He fucking does a great job of it. It almost feels like a lot of the concepts he uses is very unique and like actually scientific, and I'm sure it's not. But
actually, I mean, even just that premise of replicating to go explore has been, I think that's a von Neumann machine. The idea of you basically build a machine that's designed to replicate and send off copies of itself, and how quickly you can spread through a galaxy that way.
That's exactly what it is, and he names his clones, and he's like connected to them to a certain degree, but they all have different personalities. And, you know, where he is like a reserved person, maybe Clayton is a psycho, and he goes off and like, you know, the original Bob like does his own thing, and maybe he sees a very they find a society on another planet that's very like, you know, like original human, and he tries to kind of intervene to help them elevate and evolve faster. And if you have some time and you want to check out a new series, it's really good, and I feel like your background, you'd fucking love it. And you gotta tell me if you like it or not.
Yeah, I will have to check that out.
I think I'm like 3 books in. I think there's a 4th book, and I haven't read it in a while, so I need to like revisit book 3 before I get 4, because it'll fuck with me. But let's end here. I gotta ask, and I'm sure you've been asked this before. Do you believe there's life outside of Earth, man?
I mean, it's
somewhere.
It's an interesting speculation. I used an April Fool's paper last year to sort of speculate on that. To suggest,
is that in the faux journal
Yeah.
you were talking about, the Acta Prima?
Acta Prima Aprilia.
Okay.
It's part of a. There's a fair number of people that do this, at least one-offs. It's usually a grad school experiment, is sort of putting out a joke paper on April 1st. I have done
That's cool.
a chunk of those.
It's got to be fun. That's got to be like fun for you.
It's very fun. It always runs the risk of being taken seriously. So there's topics that I'm always a bit more nervous about. Did one that was about astrology and exoplanets, which I get emails about, asking if there's new work on that from astrologers, which is always a tad concerning. And so I did one on UFOs that I combined UFO sightings and meteor showers and the that whole weather balloon fiasco.
Oh Jesus!
Into one solid thing, which I think the title was UFOs, Just Hot Air, or something Meteor.
That is awesome. That is great.
A lot of fun with that. So it's fun to play with the concepts, but at the same time, we don't have evidence of anything. But I think it was Cosmos that said if there isn't anything out there, it's an awful big waste of space.
Well, it's expanding every day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be. I mean, obviously we don't have any evidence, and I'm sure well past our lifetime, maybe there will be. I think a lot of the stuff they talk about now with aliens, I feel like that's something that's more like interdimensional than actual like people coming from, 10, 20, 50 light years away, right? I mean, that would seem more logical to me, and I'm not a fucking scientist, but I think, people and maybe it's just different dimensions of different fucking humans or different people that inhabit the Earth. Yeah. Who fucking knows?
I think I've seen,
but I feel like that's more logical.
This
than
solid question
someone traveling.
Of sort of no one has gotten here, suggesting that at least enough time, the time and capability combined don't exist. But
yeah,
it still leaves the uncertainty of we haven't traveled very far either.
No.
So the question,
in the grand scheme of things, absolutely not.
Yeah. The one thing it does lead to is that implies either we still have somehow gotten to the point of space travel before you'd expect that to have otherwise happened, which is weird. You don't expect us to be special in that way, necessarily. Because you think how quickly space travel has advanced from 120 years ago, planes were not really a thing.
It's wild to think about.
Yeah, and when you go,
damn sure.
Yeah, so it's like if a century of change in a universe this old that's very rapid change. So then the other concern is it more that once you hit this point, civilization doesn't have that much time to go? Which is a much more ominous thought.
Not to mention, dude, our cell phones are smarter than fucking Apollo 13 was. So the fact that they went up, certain, that's Apollo 13 might not be the best example, but the fact that some of those guys went up there with computers that were not smart and survived to a certain degree is kind of wild. And I'm sure we could talk for fucking hours about that.
So yeah, that's it's an unnerving. There's a lot of really good quotes that come up. People put a lot of thought into this. I think one of them is, "We're either alone in the universe or we're not. Both possibilities are equally terrifying."
It's true.
So yeah, the position that I think where I end up and a lot of people is like, there's probably something out there. The odds that we have the contact with it and the evidence with it stating certainty, that seems lacking. But one of the things we've learned really, in the time span that I've been dealing with exoplanets, the realization of just how many there are really removes the idea of like, okay, no, planets are very, very common. We think planets that can sustain life are probably fairly common. Getting between them,
whether they're like us,
yeah,
whether they're like us, that's a different story.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking an amoeba in its infancy, which is where we all kind of fucking came from, or you're talking about like primates or whatever, it'll be interesting to see in our lifetime.
Yeah,
kind of
as we've been getting a better idea of those planets, it's really interesting to see what's going on as the combination of what we know about these planets, the interdisciplinary stuff, where you get astronomers and planetary scientists that study, atmospheres and things like that, talking with like biologists and chemists to get an idea of, okay, we know things like this exist. What kind of life could be there? And that's a really fascinating thing, especially when they can break it down beyond, can we live there, and more into what would live there, what kinds of things can live there, not just what are we used to.
It's exciting, man. I'm excited for that. I mean, whether it's in our lifetime or not, it's kind of cool to think about. But look, let's end with plug your shit, man. Tell the listeners where they can find all your content, what you want them to talk about, and we'll
so for the podcast, we are the Old Switcheroo. That's Switch AROO. And you can find us either at theoldswitcheroo.com. We're also on YouTube and anywhere you get podcasts at The Old Switcheroo, as well as Instagram and TikTok and all of that. If you go to our website, that has links to everywhere else, so you can find whichever part of that content you want.
Awesome, dude. Well, look, my podcast you can find everywhere you listen to podcasts. Socials is Drink O'Clock Pod on basically everything. I'm also part of the Deluxe Edition Network. It's a network of podcasts, great guys. Podcast of the month for our network is Films and Fermentation and Friends Talking Dirty. I mean, we have a lot of stuff, man. It's like TV, games, film, general, interview. It's a really cool network, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And look, it was a pleasure having you on, man. We'll have to do this again. If you ever want me on for any episodes you do, you let me know. I'd be happy to jump on your guys' podcast.
I would definitely reach out to you, especially as we can start to. I think if we convince enough people that we get enough people listen to our podcast that realize they should get Nintendo Switch Online, my hope is eventually Nintendo starts kicking in some money. That would be great. We're pretty much doing long form ads.
Yeah, it'd be fucking awesome, dude.
I don't know. I don't think that's possible, but it's like we're almost a long form ad they don't pay for.
I mean, you talked me into it,
Yeah.
so I'd imagine if you just get a fraction of that, you'll help them with their bottom dollar.
Absolutely, yeah. We will follow up with that afterwards. We're starting to look at what our season 2 lineup's going to be, and it'll be a solid second season when we kick off.
Awesome, dude. Well, look, you got a follower, and I appreciate you hopping on, and have a great night, dude. Enjoy the rain.
Yeah. Seems to have stopped, so I will enjoy that a lot more. Yeah, thank you. This has been
awesome,
a blast.
man. Well, thank you. Yeah, you have a great night.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Drink O'Clock Podcast, where fascinating people from all over the world share their stories over a drink. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform to catch up on past episodes and stay up to date on new releases. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future guests, the team at Drink O'Clock would love to hear from you. You can find them on most social media at Drink O'Clock Pod. Until next time, stay classy and remember, people, it's always happy hour somewhere. Cheers.